My brother raised his glass in our parents' crowded living room and laughed. "This is my brother," he said loudly. "No degree. No future. Still living off the family." Everyone laughed. My parents smiled. I felt every eye on me, waiting for me to shrink. Instead, I lifted my glass and said, "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will ever see me." The room went dead silent as I walked out. What none of them knew what made that moment irreversible was that I wasn't leaving with nothing. I was leaving with a phone call they never knew I'd already received. Most people think favoritism is loud, obvious, something you can point to and call unfair. In my family, it was quieter than that. Growing up, I learned early how to make myself smaller. Not because anyone told me to, no one had to. I just watched what got rewarded and what got ignored. Lucas, my older brother, had a gravity that pulled everything toward him. His achievements were announced. His opinions were asked for. His mistakes were reframed as learning experiences. Mine disappeared into the background. We grew up in a tidy, respectable suburb where lawns were trimmed and problems were never discussed openly. From the outside, we looked like a model family. Inside, the hierarchy was clear. Lucas was the future. I was the other one. At school, teachers praised Lucas's leadership. At family dinners, relatives asked him about his plans, his grades, his internships. When they turned to me, it was usually with a polite, distracted question. "So, how's school? Fine?" I'd answer. And that was enough. I didn't resent Lucas at first. I admired him. He was confident in a way I wasn't. He knew how to talk to adults, how to sell himself, how to walk into a room like he belonged there. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I stayed out of trouble, if I didn't ask for much, my turn would come too. In college, I finally felt like I was becoming someone. I was studying digital design and visual media, long nights in computer labs, projects that swallowed entire weekends, the kind of work that made time disappear. For the first time in my life, effort translated directly into progress. The better I got, the more excited I felt. I wasn't drifting. I was building something. But when I talked about it at home, the response was always muted. "That's nice," my mother would say, already moving on to the next topic. "And what does that lead to?" my father would ask, frowning, like he was doing math in his head. Lucas, meanwhile, was finishing business school. His path was clean, traditional, easy to explain to other people. Finance, management, promotions, titles that sounded impressive even if you didn't understand them. When relatives visited, my parents would beam talking about him. "Lucas is doing so well. We're so proud of him." About me, they'd say, "He's still figuring things out." It wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was dismissive, casual, as if my life were a rough draft they didn't bother reading closely. I told myself it didn't matter. That once I graduated, once I had something tangible to show, they'd see me differently. Then everything changed. My father's health collapsed without warning. One week he was working nonstop. The next, he was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. The family business, small, fragile, held together by habit, started unraveling almost immediately. Bills stacked up. Clients disappeared. Panic crept into every conversation. Lucas was weeks away from finishing his final term. Internships lined up. Offers on the horizon. His future was finally materializing in the way my parents had always dreamed. One night, sitting in a hospital waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee, my parents turned to me. They didn't demand anything. They asked, "Could you take a semester off? Just temporarily. Just until things stabilize." They promised it wouldn't derail my future. They promised they'd help me go back. They promised they hadn't forgotten about me. I believed them. Of course, I said yes. That semester turned into another. Then another. Tuition became impossible. Every dollar I earned went to survival medical costs, keeping the business running, keeping everyone afloat. I worked constantly. Early mornings, late nights, jobs that blurred together. I watched my classmates graduate on social media while I served strangers and came home exhausted. Lucas graduated with honors. There was a party. There were speeches. There were photos. I stood at the edge of the room holding a paper plate, clapping along, telling myself this was temporary, that my sacrifice meant something, that when things settled, my family would remember who had stepped in when it mattered. But memory is selective. As Lucas's career accelerated, the story shifted. My absence from school stopped being framed as a sacrifice and started being framed as a choice. My exhaustion became a lack of ambition. My flexibility became aimlessness. No one said it outright at first. They didn't have to. When relatives asked why I wasn't finished with my degree yet, my mother would shrug. He just didn't stick with it. When my father talked about responsibility, his eyes never quite landed on me. And Lucas, he stopped asking how I was doing altogether. By the time I moved into a small apartment and began working freelance, rebuilding my skills quietly, the narrative had hardened. I wasn't the son who had stepped up. I was the one who hadn't made it. And the most painful part wasn't the judgment. It was realizing that somewhere along the way, my family had rewritten our history, and I was the only one who remembered it the way it actually happened. When people talk about sacrifice, they usually imagine a single dramatic moment, a clear decision, a heroic choice. For me, it happened slowly, in pieces, until one day I looked up and realized my life no longer belonged to me. At first, taking time off from school felt manageable, temporary. I told myself I was being responsible, that real adults handled crises instead of chasing dreams. I packed my textbooks into boxes and promised I'd open them again in a few months. I never did. My days settled into a rhythm that left no room for anything else. Mornings started before sunrise at a coffee shop near the highway, serving commuters who never learned my name. Afternoons were spent stocking shelves at a retail store where the lights were always too bright and the hours crawled. Nights belonged to a diner that smelled like grease and exhaustion, where I poured coffee for truckers at 2 a.m. and wiped down counters with hands that shook from fatigue. I slept 4 hours if I was lucky. Every paycheck disappeared before I could touch it. Hospital bills, loan payments, vendor invoices for the business. I learned to stretch dollars in ways that felt almost athletic. I stopped buying new clothes, stopped going out, stopped planning anything beyond the next shift. Meanwhile, my parents kept reassuring me, just a little longer. We couldn't do this without you. As soon as your dad is better, we'll fix everything. They said it with conviction, with gratitude, with love. I believed them. What I didn't realize was that while I was standing still, everyone else was moving forward. Lucas finished his degree and slid seamlessly into a corporate role. His internship turned into a full-time offer. His full-time role turned into recognition. Every few months, there was something new to celebrate: a raise, a move, a bigger apartment. My parents talked about his success constantly. It gave them hope. It made the sacrifices feel worth it. I was proud of him, or at least, I tried to be. But sometimes, standing behind the counter at the diner, watching couples laugh over late-night meals, I'd pull out my phone during a break and see photos of Lucas in a suit, smiling beside coworkers in offices with glass walls and skyline views. And something ugly would twist in my chest. I'd push it down and remind myself why I was here. Family first. This is what adults do. My turn will come later. Months passed, then years. When the business finally stabilized and my father recovered enough to return to work, I expected a conversation, a plan, a roadmap back to school. It never came. Instead, the tone shifted subtly. Gratitude faded. Expectation took its place. When I mentioned going back to finish my degree, my father frowned. Are you sure that's realistic right now? My mother worried aloud about money, about timing, about whether it made sense to go backwards. Lucas stayed out of it entirely. I started freelancing at night, teaching myself new software, taking on small design jobs wherever I could find them. It felt like a lifeline, proof that I hadn't lost myself completely. But to my family, it looked like avoidance. You're always on that computer, my mother would say. When are you going to get a real job? My father asked once. Not unkindly, but not gently either. That was the moment something cracked. Not because of the question itself, but because of what it ignored. The years I'd given up, the exhaustion I'd normalized, the education I'd paused so someone else's future could stay intact. None of it counted anymore. I realized then that sacrifice only has value if someone remembers it, if someone acknowledges it. In my family, my sacrifice had quietly expired. What hurt most wasn't that they didn't thank me. It was that they had started to believe I'd never sacrificed anything at all. And somewhere deep down, I understood a truth I wasn't ready to face, yet I had given up my future for people who were already moving on without me. At 22, I told myself this was just a pause, not the end of anything, not a failure, just a detour I hadn't planned for. I packed my college life into cardboard boxes, textbooks, sketchbooks, a half-finished project I'd been proud of, and stacked them neatly in the corner of my childhood bedroom. I remember standing there for a long time, convincing myself I'd open those boxes again soon. I didn't know that was the moment my life quietly split in two. Once I stepped fully into helping my family, there was no clean boundary between temporary and permanent. Every day brought a new emergency, a new reason why this wasn't the right time for me to think about myself. The business needed oversight. My father needed care. Bills didn't wait. So neither did I. I took whatever work I could find. Morning shifts, late nights, weekends, jobs that didn't care who I was or how tired I felt, only whether I showed up on time. My body adjusted faster than my mind. Exhaustion became my default state. 4 hours of sleep felt generous. 6 felt indulgent. I stopped telling people what I used to study. It was easier to say, I'm just working right now. Every few months, I'd bring it up gently at home. So, when things calmed down, I'm thinking of enrolling again. The responses were never direct refusals. They were worse. Well, let's see how this quarter goes. Maybe after the next contract comes through. Your dad still isn't fully back yet. The timeline kept sliding forward, always just out of reach. Meanwhile, Lucas's life was accelerating. He finished school, landed his first real position, and immediately started climbing. He spoke a language my parents understood: titles, firms, performance reviews. His progress came with numbers and structure. Mine came with fatigue and silence. At family gatherings, people asked him about his work in detail. They turned to me and asked if I was still helping out. I was. I always was. I watched my parents' pride shift entirely onto him, not because he was cruel, but because success is easier to admire when it's neat and familiar. Lucas fit the image they wanted to present to the world. I didn't. And slowly, something painful happened. The gratitude disappeared. Helping out stopped being seen as generosity and started being seen as obligation. When I mentioned how tired I was, it was brushed off. When I talked about my freelance work, it was dismissed as a hobby. You're talented, my mother said once. Distracted. But talent doesn't pay the bills. I wanted to scream that it already had, that it was paying their bills. Instead, I swallowed it. The first time I felt real resentment scared me. It came late one night, at the diner, wiping down counters after closing. My phone buzzed with a photo notification. Lucas, dressed sharp, raising a glass at some networking event. Caption: grateful for how far I've come. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I wasn't jealous of his success. I was angry that my sacrifice had become invisible. That night, driving home on empty roads, I admitted something to myself for the first time. I wasn't being asked to wait anymore. I was being quietly erased. The promise that I could go back to school, back to my life, was no longer a promise. It was a story my family told themselves to avoid acknowledging what they'd taken from me. And deep down, a seed of resentment took root. Not loud, not explosive, just a steady, dangerous realization. I had given up years of my life for people who had already decided to move on without me. The most disturbing thing about being erased isn't the silence. It's watching people rewrite your story while you're still standing right there. By the time I moved into my small one-bedroom apartment and committed fully to freelancing, my family had already decided who I was. Not who I'd been, not what I'd done, who I was now, according to the version that was easiest for them to live with. To them, I hadn't paused my education for the family. I had dropped out. That word followed me everywhere. Dropped out. Couldn't handle it. Lost motivation. Didn't finish what he started. It showed up in conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, and in the careful phrasing they used when others asked about me. He just never found his direction. My father told a neighbor once, "He's very creative." My mother added quickly, "Like that?" Explained everything. But you know how those things go. I stood in the hallway listening, my stomach twisting. They weren't lying outright. They were doing something worse. They were simplifying. All the messy context, the hospital nights, the double shifts, the promises made and never kept was inconvenient. Hard to explain at dinner parties. So it disappeared. What replaced it was a version of me that fit neatly into their worldview, the son who didn't quite make it. At first, I tried to correct them. I didn't just quit. I'd say carefully, "I was helping when Dad got sick." My father would nod vaguely. "Yes, but that was a long time ago." As if time erased responsibility, as if sacrifice had an expiration date. Eventually, I stopped defending myself. I poured everything into my work instead. Freelancing wasn't glamorous. It was long nights hunched over my laptop, learning new software through trial and error, redesigning projects for clients who didn't know what they wanted and didn't want to pay what it was worth. But every finished piece felt like proof that I hadn't imagined my ability, that I was still capable of building something meaningful. I sent my family links to projects I was proud of. They didn't open them. When I talked about clients, my mother smiled politely and asked if I'd thought about applying somewhere more stable. My father asked when I planned to get benefits. Lucas changed the subject entirely. I realized then that my work didn't threaten them because it wasn't good. It threatened them because it contradicted the story they'd settled on. If I was doing well, then maybe I wasn't lazy. If I wasn't lazy, then maybe they'd misjudged me. And if they'd misjudged me, then they might have to face what they'd asked me to give up. So they doubled down. At family gatherings, jokes crept in. "Still doing your computer thing? Must be nice not having a boss." Some people just aren't meant for traditional success. Everyone laughed lightly, like it was harmless. I laughed too, because pushing back felt exhausting. The worst part was watching Lucas absorb this version of me. He'd started treating me like someone who'd fallen behind. His tone shifted, condescending without being openly cruel. Advice I didn't ask for. Suggestions about getting serious. Comments about how competitive the world was. Once, over coffee, he said, "You know, not everyone is cut out for high-pressure environments." I stared at him, stunned. I wanted to list the nights I'd worked until my vision blurred. The years I'd lived on caffeine and obligation. The pressure of holding a family together while being quietly dismissed by the same people I was sacrificing for. Instead, I nodded, because arguing would have meant reopening a truth they'd already decided to bury. And that's how gaslighting works, not by screaming at you, but by calmly insisting that your memory is flawed, your pain exaggerated, your reality inconvenient. By the time his promotion party was announced, the version of me my family believed in was fully formed. I was the son who hadn't finished school, the brother who never quite launched, the cautionary tale. They didn't see the hours. They didn't see the discipline. They didn't see the quiet rebuilding. They saw what they needed to see to feel comfortable with the choices they'd made. Standing on the edge of that party, holding a gift I'd spent hours preparing, I still carried a small, foolish hope that maybe tonight would be different, that maybe they'd finally ask how I was really doing, that maybe I could share something good. I didn't understand yet that I wasn't walking into a celebration. I was walking into the moment where their rewritten truth would be spoken out loud and turned into a punchline. By the time the invitation to Lucas's promotion party arrived, the damage had already been done. But I still went. That fact alone should tell you how desperate I was for something to change. I convinced myself it mattered, that showing up mattered, that being supportive, even after years of quiet dismissal, would somehow shift the narrative. I told myself adults didn't hold grudges, that families eventually corrected themselves. So I showed up early. I spent the afternoon baking a layered chocolate cake from scratch-tempered ganache. Delicate sponge. The kind of recipe that demanded patience and precision. I wanted to bring something personal, something that said I tried. I put on my best suit, the only one I owned, bought on clearance, and tailored just enough to look intentional. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have, practicing a smile I hoped looked natural. When I arrived, the house was already full. Lucas's coworkers filled the living room, wine glasses in hand, talking loudly about deals and bonuses. Relatives clustered near the kitchen, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't funny. The air buzzed with celebration, and none of it felt like it included me. My mother took the cake from my hands without really looking at it. "Oh, you didn't have to," she said, already turning away to greet someone else. She placed it on the counter next to catered trays and store-bought desserts, where it disappeared immediately into the background. My father was deep in conversation with Lucas's supervisor, animated, proud, gesturing like a man whose success had been personally validated. He didn't notice me at all. No one asked how I was doing. I hovered near the kitchen, out of the way, nursing a drink I barely touched. I told myself to be patient, that this wasn't about me, that tonight was Lucas's night. Then I overheard my mother. She was speaking to a small group of Lucas's colleagues, spouses, her voice bright with pride. "We're so blessed," she said. "Lucas has done incredibly well for himself. We're very proud of him." One of the women glanced toward me, clearly uncomfortable. My mother followed her gaze briefly and then smiled tighter. "Well," she added, lowering her voice just enough, "we have one successful child." Something in my chest went cold. Before I could move, my father joined the group. "Some kids just have drive," he said casually, "and some don't. You can't force it." "We tried." The words landed like a slap. I stood there gripping my glass, my knuckles white, staring at the wall as if it might steady me. Part of me wanted to confront them right then. Another part begged me to leave quietly. I didn't either, because I was still hoping. Lucas clinked his glass. The room quieted as he stepped into the center of the living room. Confident, polished, every inch the man everyone expected him to be. Applause followed before he even spoke. He thanked his firm, thanked his mentors, thanked our parents for their unwavering support. They beamed. Then his eyes landed on me. "And of course," he said, his tone shifting, sharpening just slightly, "I should introduce my brother for those of you who haven't met him." My stomach dropped. "This is Ethan," Lucas continued, smiling. "No degree, no real career, still freeloading off the family while the rest of us move forward." The room exploded. Not polite laughter, not awkward chuckles, real laughter. My parents laughed. My aunt laughed. My cousins laughed. Lucas's coworkers laughed. His boss laughed. I felt heat flood my face as every head turned toward me. Waiting, waiting for shame, for collapse, for me to prove the story they'd already decided was true. For half a second, I almost gave it to them. Then something hardened. I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a joke gone too far. This was the version of me they'd been rehearsing for years, finally performed out loud. So I smiled. I raised my glass. "Cheers," I said clearly, calmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is the last time any of you will ever see me." The laughter died instantly. Silence crashed into the room, thick and shocked. My mother gasped. Someone whispered my name. Lucas's smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. I set my glass down untouched. No speech, no explanation. I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Outside, the night air hit my lungs like oxygen. My hands shook as I crossed the driveway, the house glowing behind me like a stage I'd finally stepped off. As I reached my car, my phone began vibrating violently in my pocket. Texts, calls, demands. I didn't check any of them. I started the engine and pulled away, my heart pounding, tears blurring the road, but beneath the pain was something else. Relief. Because in that moment, I finally understood the truth. They hadn't humiliated me by accident. They'd revealed exactly who they were. And for the first time in years, I stopped trying to earn love from people who only valued me as a punchline. The moment I turned onto the main road, my phone started vibrating, like it was trying to break free from my pocket. I ignored it at first. I needed both hands on the wheel. My chest felt too tight, my thoughts too loud. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror. But the laughter stayed with me, looping in my head like a soundtrack I couldn't shut off. At the first red light, I glanced down. Missed call, Mom. Text from Mom. "How could you do this to us?" Another text. "Get back here right now." The light turned green. I kept driving. A few seconds later, another buzz. Text from Lucas, "Relax. It was just a joke. You're always so sensitive." Another one followed almost immediately. "You completely ruined my night." I felt something twist in my stomach, not surprise, but recognition. Even now, even after everything, the instinct was the same. Deflect. Minimize. Blame me for reacting instead of owning what was said. Then my father's name appeared on the screen. "Your mother is very upset. You owe everyone an apology." That one hurt the most. Not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. It confirmed what I'd always known, but had never fully accepted. My role in this family was to absorb discomfort so others didn't have to feel it. I drove the 20 minutes to my apartment on autopilot. The roads blurred. Streetlights streaked past like broken thoughts. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, my phone was face down in the passenger seat, buzzing relentlessly. I sat there with the engine off, staring at nothing. Then I broke. I cried the way you cry when you've been holding it in for years, silent at first, then shaking, then completely undone. It wasn't just what Lucas had said. It was what it confirmed. That no matter what I'd sacrificed, no matter how hard I tried, they truly believed I was the problem. I went upstairs to my small second-floor studio and collapsed onto the bed without taking my shoes off. My chest ached like I'd lost someone. Because I had. I grabbed my phone and opened my contacts. Mom. Block. Dad. Block. Lucas. Block. Aunt. Cousins. Block. 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 Each tap felt heavy and final. When I finished, the silence was immediate and unnerving. No more buzzing. No more demands. Just the hum of my refrigerator and my own breathing. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, replaying the night from the beginning. The cake. The smiles. The hope I'd walked in with. How naive I'd been. Sometime after midnight, when exhaustion finally dulled the edge of the pain, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was done explaining myself, done defending my existence, but something intuition maybe made me answer. Hello, hi. A man said, his voice calm. Professional. Is this Ethan Clark? Yes. This is Daniel Brooks. I'm the creative director at Northline Studio in Harbor City. I've been trying to reach you for a few days. I sat up slowly, my heart stuttering. I'm sorry. What I came across your portfolio through an open submission. He continued. Your work is exceptional. Clean. Bold. Exactly what we've been looking for. We'd like to offer you a full-time position as a junior art lead. The room felt suddenly too small. There's a salary, Daniel added, full benefits, and relocation assistance. If you're open to it. The only thing is we need an answer within 48 hours. I couldn't speak. My laptop sat closed on the desk across the room. I didn't know it yet, but the life I'd just walked away from was already being replaced. And for the first time that night, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space. I didn't sleep that night. After I hung up the phone, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, replaying Daniel's words over and over like they might disappear if I stopped paying attention. We'd like to offer you a position. It didn't feel real. Not after the night I just had. Not after years of being told directly and indirectly that what I did wasn't enough. Wasn't serious. Wasn't valuable. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There it was. 3 unread messages from Northline Studio. Each one more detailed than the last. A formal offer letter. Salary breakdown. Benefits. Relocation assistance. Everything legitimate. Everything I'd secretly hoped for and stopped expecting. I laughed once. A short, breathless sound. Then covered my mouth as tears spilled over again. This time, they were different. By dawn, I knew my answer. I wrote back carefully, rereading the email 3 times before hitting send. Daniel, thank you for the offer. I'm honored. I accept, and I'm ready to start as soon as possible. I pressed send before fear could talk me out of it. The reply came an hour later. Warm and enthusiastic. Onboarding paperwork. A start date 2 weeks out. Contact information for a relocation specialist in Harbor City. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to dismantle the only life I'd known for years. Those days passed in a blur of logistics and resolve. I gave notice on my apartment, packed my belongings into mismatched boxes, sold furniture I couldn't take, donated what I didn't need. My entire life fit into my car. Not once did my family reach out. I told myself not to check. That silence was their choice, not my responsibility. Still, each quiet day hardened my resolve. If they were waiting for me to apologize, they were going to be disappointed. On moving day, I loaded the last box, closed the trunk, and stood for a moment in the empty parking lot. The place where I'd rebuilt myself in pieces felt suddenly distant, like a skin I'd outgrown. I drove away without looking back. Harbor City hit me all at once. The noise, the scale, the energy. It felt alive in a way my old life never had. The relocation specialist helped me find a small studio in the Bay District, nothing fancy, but clean, bright, and mine. Morning light poured through the east-facing windows, and something about that felt symbolic. My first day at Northline Studio. I was terrified. The office spanned 2 floors of a glass building near the water. Designers moved through the space with purpose, talking about clients and deadlines and ideas like it all mattered, because here, it did. Daniel met me in the lobby exactly as he'd sounded on the phone. Confident but kind. Direct without being dismissive. "Ethan," he said, shaking my hand. "We're really glad you're here." He introduced me to what felt like dozens of people, but 3 names stuck. Maya, a sharp-witted copywriter with an infectious laugh. Aaron, an associate creative director who looked me straight in the eye and said, "Daniel doesn't hire on potential alone. You earned this." And Chris, another designer, competitive but fair, who nodded once and said, "Let's see what you've got." My desk sat in the open creative space, surrounded by people who actually did what I did, who spoke my language. Daniel handed me my first assignment, a small digital campaign for an eco-conscious lifestyle brand. Nothing flashy, but real. A real client, a real deadline. I worked like my life depended on it. Early mornings, late nights, revisions stacked on revisions. For the first time, exhaustion felt purposeful. Maya brought me coffee without asking. Aaron stopped by with feedback that was blunt but constructive. Even Chris leaned over once and said, "That concept, it's solid." Something inside me shifted. Weeks turned into months. My confidence grew quietly, without fanfare. I started to believe I belonged there, not because I needed to prove anything, but because the work spoke for itself. I didn't think about my family much. When I did, it was with a dull ache I pushed aside. I was building something new now, and this time, no one was laughing. 4 months into my new job, my life had settled into something almost unrecognizable. I had routines, deadlines, people who expected things from me and meant it in a good way. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I was focused, growing, quietly proud. That was when the message arrived. It came through LinkedIn on a Saturday morning while I was halfway through my second cup of coffee. "Hi, Ethan. We've never met, but I work with your brother. I have something important you need to know. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My first instinct was to ignore it. I had worked too hard to put distance between my old life and this new one. Anything connected to my family felt radioactive. But curiosity won. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and her office. Her name was Samantha. Early 30s. Direct. No small talk. "I'll get straight to the point," she said, folding her hands on the table. "Your brother has been taking credit for your work." My stomach dropped. "What?" I said. "About a year ago," she continued, "Lucas submitted a presentation deck to our partners. He claimed he designed it himself. It played a significant role in his promotion." My heart started pounding. I remembered the call. Lucas sounding unusually friendly, asking for help with a last-minute client pitch. "Just some visuals," he'd said. "You're good at that stuff." I'd stayed up all night refining that deck, polishing it, making it clean and sharp. I'd sent it to him with a short note wishing him luck. "He didn't mention you at all," Samantha said. "Not once." I swallowed. "How do you know?" She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Screenshots, email chains, file properties, creation timestamps, metadata showing the original author. My name had been stripped before submission. "I recognized the style," she said quietly. I was looking for a designer for a side project and came across your portfolio. It clicked immediately. Same structure, same visual language. My hand shook as I scrolled. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Her expression hardened. Because he's done this before. To others? And because what he did to you wasn't just unethical, it was theft. We met twice more over the next 2 weeks. Each time, Samantha brought more documentation, more proof, enough to destroy the narrative my brother had built so carefully. She made it clear the choice was mine. Confront him, report it, or do nothing, she said. But you deserve to know the truth. I went home that night feeling hollow. Part of me wanted revenge. Immediate, explosive justice. I imagined forwarding the evidence to his firm, watching the consequences unfold. Another part of me felt tired. I was finally building something real, something fragile in its early success. Did I want to drag my past into it? At work, things kept moving forward. I was assigned a larger client. Daniel praised my work in a team meeting. People started coming to me for input. Each success made the betrayal sting sharper. Lucas hadn't just mocked me publicly. He had built part of his success on my sacrifice, and then used that stolen success to humiliate me. Late one night, sitting alone in my apartment, I saved the evidence into a single folder. I labeled it simply Truth. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The version of my brother I'd defended for years no longer existed. And whatever came next, I wouldn't protect him from the consequences of his own choices anymore. For weeks after Samantha handed me the evidence, I lived in a strange in-between state. Every time my phone buzzed, a part of me hoped it was news that Lucas's carefully constructed world had already started to collapse. Another part of me dreaded that possibility. Not because he didn't deserve consequences, but because I wasn't sure I wanted my future tangled up in his downfall. Revenge is seductive when you've been wronged. It promises balance, closure, a sense that the universe has corrected itself. But it also keeps you tethered to the very people you're trying to escape. I carried that folder Truth with me everywhere. Like a loaded weapon I hadn't decided whether to fire. Some nights, I opened it just to remind myself I hadn't imagined any of it. That I wasn't crazy. That the story I'd lived was real. Then I closed it again. Because my life kept moving forward. At Northline Studio, my role expanded almost without me noticing. I was trusted with bigger clients, longer timelines, more autonomy. Daniel started asking for my input in early strategy meetings, not just design reviews. You see things others don't, he told me once. That matters. Maya became a constant in my days, lunches filled with sarcastic commentary and shared exhaustion. Aaron pushed me harder than anyone ever had, challenging my choices, forcing me to articulate why I believed in a concept instead of just how it looked. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't proving myself to people who doubted my worth. I was refining myself among people who assumed it. That distinction changed everything. Slowly, I built a life that felt solid. Weeknight dinners with coworkers turned into friendships. Conversations expanded beyond work music. Relationships, childhood stories we'd never told anyone else. I started laughing again in ways that didn't feel defensive. I realized something unsettling one evening while walking home from work. I hadn't thought about Lucas all day. That felt like progress. The anger didn't disappear. It sharpened, focused itself, then receded into something quieter, more controlled. I understood that exposing him wouldn't heal me. It might satisfy me briefly, but it wouldn't give me what I actually wanted. Peace. I wanted a life so full that his shadow couldn't reach it. That didn't mean forgiveness. It meant prioritization. I poured myself into a major rebranding project for a sustainable apparel company. Long hours, endless iterations, creative debates that pushed me to my limits. When Daniel praised the final concept in front of the entire team, something inside me settled. This is where your energy belongs. I still kept the evidence. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because choosing growth over revenge didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It meant refusing to let my pain dictate my future. I started to understand that boundaries aren't just walls. They're decisions, choices you make every day about where your time, attention, and emotional labor go. My family no longer occupied those spaces. One evening, after a late meeting, Aaron walked with me toward the subway. "You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't left?" he asked casually. I didn't hesitate. Probably stuck, trying to earn approval from people who never intended to give it. He nodded once. "Yeah, that tracks." As I rode the train home, watching the city blur past, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the pain, but for what it had forced me to build. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was outgrowing it. And while the temptation to expose the truth still flickered now and then, I understood something important. If I ever did use that evidence, it wouldn't be out of anger. It would be because the moment demanded it. And when that moment came, I'd be ready not as the brother they dismissed, but as the man I'd become without them. The email came in on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line marked urgent. I was halfway through refining layouts for a mid-sized client when Daniel leaned over my desk. His expression unreadable. Conference room. Now. Inside. The senior team was already seated. Laptops open. Whiteboard covered in notes. Daniel didn't waste time. "We've been shortlisted for a full rebrand pitch," he said. "For Atlas Technologies." The room went quiet. Atlas wasn't just another client. They were a major player, national presence, deep pockets, and a reputation for being ruthless in who they chose to work with. Landing them wouldn't just mean revenue. It would put Northline Studio on an entirely different tier. They requested someone specific. Daniel continued, turning to look directly at me. "They asked for you." For a second, I was sure I'd misheard him. "Me. They came across your work during their research phase." Aaron added, "Your design language stood out. They want you leading the pitch." My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't incremental growth. This was a leap. The pitch date appeared on the screen. Saturday, 2 weeks from now. On site. Then the location. My stomach tightened. The Atlas headquarters was in Riverton, 90 minutes from my parents' house. The same city where my family lived. The same weekend my mother had texted months earlier about a baby shower I'd ignored. The same gravitational pull I'd spent a year escaping. Daniel kept talking, outlining timelines, expectations, stakes. All I could think was how perfectly cruel timing could be. If we won this, it would redefine my career. If we lost, it would still mark me as someone capable of handling pressure at the highest level. Either way, there was no room for distraction. "I want this pitch to be undeniable," Daniel said, "and I want you to own it." I nodded, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. "I will." The next 2 weeks consumed everything. Long nights at the office, whiteboards filled and erased, concepts torn apart and rebuilt stronger. Maya and I brainstormed until our coffee went cold. Aaron challenged every assumption I made, forcing me to defend each choice with clarity and conviction. Atlas needed evolution without alienation, innovation without arrogance. I designed a system that felt modern, but grounded clean typography paired with adaptable digital elements that could grow with the company. One night, well past midnight, Daniel stood behind me as I walked him through the final deck. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This," he said quietly, "is the strongest work you've done here." I drove home that night, with my hands gripping the steering wheel. Heart racing, not with fear, but anticipation. The morning of the pitch, I woke before my alarm. The city was still dark, the air sharp. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit I'd bought months earlier for someday, not knowing what that day would be. As we drove toward Riverton, the landscape shifted from city to suburbs, memories threatening to surface with every familiar exit sign. I pushed them down. This wasn't about my family. This was about who I was now. Atlas's building rose ahead of us, glass, steel, imposing. Inside, executives waited, decision-makers with little patience for weakness. I stood at the head of the table, hands steady, voice clear. For 90 minutes, I walked them through a vision that was entirely my own. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one of the executives smiled. "This," she said, "is exactly what we've been looking for." We shook hands and stepped back into the lobby, adrenaline buzzing. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. "No matter what happens," he said, "you just crossed a line most people never reach." As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Confident, focused, unrecognizable from the person who'd once begged to be taken seriously. And somewhere nearby, just a few miles away, my family was living a version of reality where I still didn't matter. They had no idea how close they were to colliding with the truth. The silence after the pitch should have been peaceful. Instead, it was tense. We were supposed to hear back from Atlas within the week, and every day felt stretched thin by anticipation. I tried to keep my focus on work, but my mind drifted more than usual. Not toward failure, but toward the past I'd deliberately left behind. That was when my phone rang. A known number. I hesitated before answering, already sensing where this was headed. "Hello, Ethan." My mother's voice. Tight. Controlled. "You blocked us." I closed my eyes. I needed space. I said carefully, "Well, that's not how family handles conflict." She replied, ignoring what I'd said. "I'm calling because Lucas and his wife are expecting, and we're planning a celebration. Everyone is contributing financially. We'll need $400 from you." There it was. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an invoice disguised as tradition. "I'm not sending money," I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Don't be difficult," she snapped. That night at the party was a misunderstanding. Lucas was joking. "You're still punishing us over something that happened months ago." "It wasn't a joke," I said, "and I'm not punishing anyone. I'm setting boundaries." She scoffed. "You've always been dramatic." I hung up. The call shook me more than I expected, not because of what she said, but because of how little had changed. In her version of events, I was still the problem. The oversensitive son. The obstacle to family harmony. The next message came from my father. "Your mother is very hurt. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't respond. Then Lucas. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to apologize. This is embarrassing. My wife is stressed and that's on you." The irony was almost impressive. I sat on my couch that night, phone in my lap, feeling the old pressure creep back in the instinct to explain myself, to smooth things over, to absorb blame so everyone else could stay comfortable. I didn't. I muted the thread. Over the next few weeks, I heard about myself through others. A cousin posted something vague online about people who fabricate entire lives for attention. A relative told a mutual acquaintance that I was going through something and the family was very concerned. According to them, I hadn't left to protect myself. I'd lost touch with reality. When Maya noticed my distraction, she cornered me during lunch. "Okay," she said, arms crossed. "What's going on?" I gave her the short version. The calls. The rumors. The way my family preferred believing I was unstable rather than wrong. She was furious on my behalf. Why don't you just tell them the truth, she demanded. Show them everything. Aaron was calmer when I told him later that evening. Why now, he asked. What would it give you? I thought about it. If I corrected them, I'd be pulled back into the chaos, defending myself, arguing with people committed to misunderstanding me. So I made a choice. I let them believe I was lying. I let them believe I was exaggerating my career, inventing success, pretending to be something I wasn't, because the truth had weight, and weight is best dropped at the right moment. I focused on work, on waiting for Atlas's decision, on the life I was actively building. My family could have their version of the story. Mine was about to become impossible to ignore. And when it did, I wanted every word I'd stayed silent on to land all at once. The call from Atlas came on a Friday afternoon. I knew it was Daniel before I even checked the screen. He never called unless it mattered. We got it, he said the moment I answered. Atlas chose us. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. Then everything exploded at once. Shouts echoed through the office. Someone clapped. Someone else actually whooped. Daniel stepped out of his glass-walled office, grinning like a man who'd just won a war. They specifically cited your pitch, he added, lowering his voice. Your vision sealed it. My hands were shaking. That project alone would change the trajectory of my career, but the ripple effect was immediate. Bigger clients reached out within days. Industry chatter picked up. People I'd never met before started referencing my work in meetings. 2 weeks later, Daniel called me into his office again. Sit down, he said, smiling. I did. Heart racing. I'm promoting you to art director. Effective immediately. The words didn't register at first. He slid a folder across the desk. New title. New salary. New responsibilities. You earned this, he said simply. That night, I celebrated quietly with Maya and Aaron over late-night takeout. No speeches. No grand gestures. Just laughter and relief and the rare comfort of being surrounded by people who genuinely understood what this meant. The public recognition came soon after. A trade publication ran a feature on the Atlas rebrand. My name was printed beneath the lead image. Lead designer Ethan Clark. Northline Studio. A few days later, the article started circulating beyond industry circles. That's how my family found out. I was in the office kitchen making coffee when my phone rang again. Another unknown number. I answered. Ethan, my mother said. Her voice was different this time. Unsteady. Is this article real? I didn't answer right away. Do you really work at this agency? She pressed. Do you really have this job? Yes, I said calmly. I do. Silence. How long? She asked. Over a year. Her breath hitched. Why didn't you tell us? I almost laughed. When would I have? I asked. When you called to ask for money. When you said Lucas was joking. When you told people I was unstable. She didn't respond. People are asking questions, she said, finally, her voice tight. They want to know why you're not around. It's embarrassing. There it was. Not we hurt you. Not we were wrong. Embarrassment. She quickly shifted gears. Lucas's son is having a birthday next month, she said. You should come. We can put everything behind us. I closed my eyes. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. Over the next few days, messages poured in. My father texted that they were proud of me. Lucas sent a casual hey. Saw the article. That's impressive. We should catch up. An aunt left a voicemail saying she'd always believed in me. Each message rewrote the past. None mentioned the party. None mentioned the laughter. None mentioned the years of dismissal. At lunch one day, I showed the messages to Aaron. They want access, he said flatly. Not accountability. I nodded. But I'd already made my decision. If they wanted to pretend nothing had happened, I wasn't going to let them. I would go to that party. Not to reconcile, but to make sure the truth was finally spoken out loud. In front of everyone, just like the lie had been. This time, I wouldn't walk away quietly. This time, I'd make sure they understood exactly what they'd lost. I arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. Precisely on time. My parents' house looked the same as it always had: freshly trimmed hedges. Cars lining the street. Music drifting out into the afternoon air. Balloons were tied to the fence. Laughter floated from the backyard. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect family gathering. I parked, sat in the car for a moment, and breathed. I wasn't nervous. I was steady. When I walked through the side gate into the backyard, conversation stalled for half a second. Heads turned. People noticed. The shift was subtle but undeniable. I was no longer invisible. Word had spread. "Oh, Ethan's here. Is that him? I saw his name in an article." My mother hurried over first. Her smile stretched tight with relief. She hugged me too quickly. Too hard. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered. Like my presence alone was saving something. My father followed, offering a stiff smile and a handshake that felt more like a formality than affection. Lucas appeared last. He looked confident, relaxed. The same version of himself that had always thrived in social settings. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. "Hey," he said casually. "Glad you could make it." Like nothing had ever happened. Guests drifted toward me throughout the afternoon, asking polite questions about my work, about the city, about how exciting things must be. Lucas hovered nearby, inserting himself into conversations, hinting at how close we were, how supportive he'd always been. I watched him rewrite history in real time. After about an hour, Lucas stepped up onto the small deck with a drink in hand and tapped his glass. "Hey, everyone," he said. "Can I get your attention for a moment?" The chatter faded. He smiled down at the crowd, holding his son, playing the part perfectly. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," he said. "Family means everything to me, especially this year. And I'm really happy my brother could be here today." He looked directly at me. "We've always been close," he added. "And it means a lot to have everyone together." That was it. That was the moment. Something inside me clicked into place: not anger, not rage, but certainty. I stood. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the space, "I'd like to say something." Every head turned toward me. My mother's face drained of color. Lucas froze. I stepped forward until I was standing where everyone could see me. 18 months ago, I began. I was standing in this house at another celebration, Lucas's promotion party. A murmur rippled through the crowd. At that party, I continued, calm and deliberate. Lucas introduced me like this: no degree, no future, just freeloading off the family. The yard went silent. I scanned the faces: relatives, coworkers, neighbors, and everyone laughed. I said, my parents laughed. My aunts laughed. My cousins laughed. People who'd never met me laughed. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "I walked out that night and said it was the last time any of you would see me." I went on, and I meant it. My mother tried to interrupt. "Ethan, please," I said, holding up a hand without looking at her. "Let me finish." I took a breath. "What none of you knew," I said, "was that years earlier, I dropped out of college to save this family. When my father got sick, when the business was failing, I worked multiple jobs. I paid medical bills. I gave up my education so my brother could finish his." Gasps. Whispers. "I didn't quit because I was lazy," I said. "I quit because I was asked to sacrifice." And then that sacrifice was erased. Lucas opened his mouth to speak. I turned to him, and then I said, Lucas asked me for help with a client presentation. I designed the entire deck. He took credit for it. That stolen work played a role in his promotion, the one we were celebrating that night. Lucas's face went red. That's not, I have the proof, I said calmly, pulling out my phone. Emails, file metadata, timestamps, original authorship. I held the screen up so the people closest could see. The reaction was immediate. People leaned in. Faces tightened. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Lucas's wife stared at him in shock. I lowered the phone. I rebuilt my life without this family, I said. I moved away. I got hired by a major agency. I led a national rebrand. I was promoted. I did all of it alone. I looked at my parents. I didn't come here today for praise, I said. I came here for accountability. My voice finally cracked. I wanted to know if any of you understood what you did to me. If anyone was willing to say they were wrong. Silence. My mother was crying now. My father looked stunned. Lucas couldn't meet my eyes. I forgive you, I said quietly, because holding on to this only hurts me. I paused. But I'm done. A collective inhale swept the yard. I'm done pretending we're something we're not, I said. You made your choice when you laughed at me. I'm making mine now. I turned and walked toward the gate. Behind me, everything exploded. Voices overlapped. My mother called my name. Someone demanded explanations. Lucas's wife started yelling at him, her voice sharp and furious. I didn't stop. At my car, my mother caught up with me, sobbing. Please, she said. We can fix this. I looked at her gently. I already fixed it, I said. I just did it without you. I got into my car and drove away. This time, I wasn't running. I was finally leaving with my dignity intact. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have. Not because of traffic, but because my mind refused to settle. My hands were steady on the wheel, yet my chest felt hollow, like something heavy had finally been removed, and the space it left behind didn't know what to do with itself. I didn't check my phone until I was parked outside my apartment. 17 missed calls. Dozens of messages. I scrolled slowly. My mother first. Please call me. We need to talk. I didn't know it was that bad. Then my father. What you did today was unacceptable. You embarrassed this family. We could have handled this privately. That one stung. Not because it surprised me, but because it proved how little he'd absorbed. Even now. Even after everything. His priority was appearances. Lucas's messages came next. You had no right to bring that up. You've put my job at risk. Why would you do this to me? Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just consequences he hadn't planned for. I put the phone down and went inside. I ordered takeout, showered, and sat on my couch, staring at the wall, letting the adrenaline drain out of my body. An hour later, a new message arrived. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. This is Melissa. I didn't know about the presentation, or a lot of things. Apparently, I'm sorry for what I said to you before. You didn't deserve that. I exhaled slowly. That was the first apology that didn't ask for anything in return. I didn't respond. But I didn't block her either. The next few days were chaos. Samantha texted me to let me know there had been an internal review at Lucas's firm. The evidence had spread faster than anyone expected. Partners were involved. Questions were being asked. Lucas had been formally reprimanded and placed on probation. He came very close to being fired. For the first time, the consequences were real and public. Then the letters arrived. The first envelope was from my mother. Thick, handwritten, 8 pages. I sat with it unopened for nearly 10 minutes before finally breaking the seal. She didn't minimize. She didn't deflect. She didn't blame. She wrote about replaying that promotion party over and over in her head, about laughing without thinking, about choosing comfort and pride over her own son, about realizing how much I'd given up and how easily she'd let the family forget it. "You were 22," she wrote. "You should have been living your life. Instead, you were holding ours together, and we punished you for it." I cried while reading it. Not loudly, quietly. The way you cry when something you waited years to hear finally arrives too late to undo the damage. But early enough to matter. A few days later, another envelope came. This one was from Lucas. Shorter. 2 pages. He admitted everything. The theft. The jealousy. The relief he'd felt when I dropped out, because it meant he'd always be ahead by default. The shame he felt now that his son might grow up seeing who he'd been. "I'm trying to be better," he wrote. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know I understand what I did." I didn't write back right away. I needed time to separate sincerity from guilt, remorse from fear of consequences. I showed both letters to someone I trusted, someone outside the situation. They read quietly, then looked at me. "What do you want?" they asked. I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want to punish them, but I also didn't want to pretend we could go back to the way things were. So when I finally wrote back, I kept it simple. I thanked my mother for the apology. I told her I wasn't ready for a relationship, that I needed time and space, that if anything were rebuilt, it would have to be slow, honest, and different. I didn't respond to Lucas at all. Not yet. Because some apologies deserve acknowledgement. Others deserve patience. And some need to sit unanswered until the person who caused the harm learns that forgiveness is not a deadline, it's a possibility. For the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet mornings where I realized I'd slept through the night without replaying old conversations. In afternoons at work when I caught myself smiling at a problem instead of bracing for it. In the steady confidence of knowing that my life no longer depended on anyone else's approval. After the confrontation, my family went silent for a while. Not the punishing silence I'd grown up with, but something heavier, reflective. I didn't chase it. I let it exist. Work became my anchor. The Atlas project launched to strong reviews. Then, stronger ones. Within weeks, it was being cited in industry newsletters. Daniel trusted me with bigger decisions. New clients asked for me by name. I was promoted again, more responsibility, more autonomy. A salary that would have felt impossible just a year earlier. I wasn't celebrating to prove anything. I was building because it finally felt like mine. Outside of work, my world grew quieter and richer. Friendships deepened. Weekends weren't spent recovering from exhaustion anymore, but actually living long walks, late dinners, conversations that didn't feel rushed or conditional. I learned what it meant to be surrounded by people who didn't need me to shrink so they could feel comfortable. A few weeks after I sent my letter to my mother, she wrote again. Short this time, careful. She told me she was in therapy, that my father had joined her, that they were trying to understand how they'd confused control with care and pride with love. She didn't ask to see me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she was listening. That mattered more than anything else she could have said. Months passed. I kept my boundaries firm. Occasional emails. No surprise calls. No demands. When I said no, it was accepted without argument. When I didn't reply right away, no one chased me. Change, I learned, isn't loud. It's consistent. Eventually, I agreed to meet my parents for coffee. Neutral ground. Limited time. It was awkward at first. Polite. measured. But something had shifted. They asked questions and waited for answers. They listened without interrupting. When the conversation turned uncomfortable, they didn't deflect. I left that meeting tired, but not drained. That was new. My brother took longer. When I finally responded to his letter months later, I didn't offer forgiveness. I offered clarity. I told him I acknowledged his apology, that I saw the effort he was making, that I wasn't ready to rebuild anything yet, and that if we ever did, it would be on terms that respected my boundaries and my work. He accepted that. Not eagerly, not perfectly, but he accepted it. Over time, the shape of my family changed. We weren't close in the old way, performative, image-driven, built on unspoken expectations. What emerged instead was smaller, quieter, more honest. I didn't attend every gathering. I wasn't always available. And no one treated that like a betrayal anymore. The biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. I no longer felt the urge to explain myself, to justify my choices, to earn a seat at a table that had never been built for me in the first place. I had my own table now. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat alone in my apartment watching the city lights come on. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, just a photo of a sunset from their backyard. No caption, no expectations. I sent back a simple heart. That was enough. I thought about the night I'd walked out of my brother's promotion party, my hands shaking, my chest burning with humiliation and grief. I believed I was losing everything. What I hadn't understood was that I was shedding something I'd been carrying for far too long. The need to be chosen by people who refused to see me. Walking away hadn't been an act of anger. It had been an act of survival. And choosing myself again and again, even when it was uncomfortable, had built a life that felt steady, expansive, and real. I didn't get a perfect ending. I got something better. A life where love came with respect, where success didn't require permission, where family, whether by blood or by choice, showed up with honesty instead of laughter at my expense. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. You don't walk away because you're weak. You walk away because you finally understand your worth. And once you do, everything else has a way of falling into place.